Hello, my name is Michael Birch. I'm an architect with Harrison Design, the studio that's working on the renovation of Holy Family. Even more importantly, though, I'm also a son of the parish. That I grew up going to Holy Family for many years, and my parents still attend. So I have a deep closeness to the community at Holy Family, and I'm very excited to be working on this project. Very delighted and very honored to do so. So in this little video, we're just going to talk about some principles of sacred architecture, talk about why churches are the way they are, what even is a church and what is it supposed to be, and then how a principles can apply to projects as we begin to do this process at Holy Family. So we're going to begin by looking at a couple churches that Harrison, our studio, has done, just to kind of show you some of our work. So this is a chapel we did for Thomas Aquinas College out in Massachusetts, renovating it in a Gothic style and bringing this Catholicism to an otherwise empty space, or with the tabernacle, with the altar, with the iconography. This is a campus that we're doing in Kansas. We're a brand new church, brand new school, parish hall, all in this larger than life classical style. Or even this, a much smaller project on the opposite side of the spectrum, a small gym space that was converted into a chapel for a religious order, now having a place for them to have their daily mass and to have this prayer and quietude together. Now, when we start thinking about churches, and especially beautiful churches, the first thing most people think of is Rome, is St. Peter's, and all of the fantastic churches in that great city. And millions of people every year visit these churches, both Catholic and some without any faith at all. And why is that? And it's because these places have this attractive, this divine beauty, in a way that transcends their material creation. And people can tell that. Even if you're not Catholic, not catechized, people can tell there's a transcendent aspect. And that's exactly what a church building is supposed to do. And meanwhile, we have churches like this in the United States. They're concrete and they're very brutal, they're harsh, or even iconographically disturbing, like this one in Ontario. And of course, America doesn't have a monopoly on ugly churches, and Europe doesn't have a monopoly on beautiful churches. And so there are plenty of amazing churches in the United States that show that churches still can be built in a beautiful traditional way. From Minnesota to New York City, from coast to coast, there are these beautiful churches. And what built these churches? Well, it was a conception of what a church building is. And so canon law defines the church building as a sacred place for divine worship. And that's a pretty simple definition, but let's try to unpack that a little bit further. So when we talk about a sacred building, what does that mean? So sacred means it is set apart. That something is set apart by its nature of its holiness or full or holy purpose. Now we don't have rock concerts and the like within the worship space at Holy Family, and that's because it is sacred. It is set apart for this divine worship. And kind of the second part of that, the divine worship, otherwise known as the liturgy. And so, what is liturgy? It's this public ritual that the church across the world, across the globe, celebrates this same set of prayers for the most important goal of the glorification of God and the sanctification of man. That is a very lofty goal, and yet it works towards this goal at every single mass at all times across the world. And the church says in Vatican II from Sacrosanctum Concilium that the liturgy is the summit to which the activity of the church is directed and the font from which all of her power flows. Again, the liturgy that is so central, is so powerful to and central to the identity of the church as the body and the church as a building. And then we'll add in a little bit of a definition too from the rite of dedication of a church. And this is the special consecration for when a church is built or when it's renovated, which says that a church is a special sign of the pilgrim church on earth and reflects the church's dwelling in heaven, and that it is a sign and symbol of heavenly realities. Wow, isn't that incredible? And so that really shows what a church is supposed to be. And depending on your conception of a church or misconception, that leads to different results. Because if the church building is only understood as the gathering place of a community versus a sign symbol of heavenly realities, you're going to have something that is much more about homeliness and about comfort than it is about showing a sign of the transcendent. And yet, from the code of canon law and from her ritual rites, that shows that yes, this is what a church is supposed to be. It's something that is powerful. It's something that's moving. It's something of great beauty. And there's theological reasons for that. So now we're going to just take a quick look at the two main parts of the church, which is the sanctuary, literally a consecrated place. And then this is, of course, the area of the altar, the ambo, and the tabernacle. This is raised up on steps. You usually sometimes have a surround, high level ornamentation, and then the nave. And this is where the body of Christ, the people gather, the laity. And it's from the navis for ship, because the church is this great ship bringing the faithful towards their journey towards God. Now we're talking about how God is present in the liturgy, and this is manifested architecturally in different ways through material changes, through level changes, where there's a couple steps up, where there's this emphasis on the sanctuary, creating a true Christian Holy of Holies, kind of harkening back to the Jewish Holy of Holies and the tabernacle and the temporal. And that we shouldn't need little placards that say, okay, this is the tabernacle, this is the altar, this is where we worship, that the building should speak for itself, that visitors and faithful alike should be able to see and feel the presence and the power of God the moment they walk into a church building. And this divine presence is shown symbolically in slightly different ways. Well, first, there's the ambo, which is symbolically connected to Christ the Word. We have the tabernacle, where God is present in the reserved Eucharist. We have the sedilia, or the cathedra, which is just a chair of a priest or a bishop who's acting in the person of Christ during the Mass. God is present that way. And of course, in the altar and from the Eucharist, in which we partake in the body and blood of Christ, where we participate in his saving mystery. Now, some of the architectural devices, as I mentioned, to show and reveal this divine presence include things like hierarchy, an ordering, and that's just not made up by us, made by man. This is a order that's defined by God. For from the beginning of the world, from the beginning of the cosmos, God created an order throughout the creation of the land and of the sea and of the water and the different types of animals, all the way up to the different choirs and ranks of angels, that God, in his great divine wisdom, has an ordering of things. And so the church building, therefore, follows that through materiality and through level change, through ornamentation, through scale. You can see that there are more important parts of the church and less important parts of the church. And this is a great example of a church in Mexico City, where the altar is just this beautiful explosion of gold and of statues, versus the nave, which is still very beautiful, powerful, and stately, but it all draws and it all culminates in the altar and in the tabernacle, as it should. And the church is also the sacramental presentation of the bride of Christ. For the wedding feast of the Lamb is the Mass, and where Christ, the bridegroom, becomes wed to church, his bride. And the church building is partaking in this mystery. And should a bride come in casual beige clothes to her wedding, in a sweatsuit, or should she come dressed, dazzling, and radiant to her wedding? I think pretty much every bride will choose the latter. And a church building is not at all different in that there are some churches that are beige, they're casual, versus there are other churches that come, they're dressed to the nines. They are ready for a uniting of God to his people. They're ready for this incredible sacrament where heaven and earth unite. Speaking of heaven and earth uniting, that again, going back to the definition of the rite of dedication of a church, that it's a sign and symbol of heavenly realities. For during the Mass, heaven and earth come together, where our present liturgy on earth is connected with the unending liturgy of heaven. And we can see art and architecture that shows this through statuary, through gilded paintings, through stained glass, where there are angels, there are saints all gathered around the altar, which constantly remind the congregation that when we sing holy, 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 we are not alone in singing that, but all of the hosts of heaven join with us at every single Mass. And that ties into the work of the liturgy. For the liturgy, as we talked about, is the preeminent work of the church with the hope of the salvation of the entire world. And so our active participation in the liturgy is so important. And thus architecture needs to help us with that. That the building should communicate the idea of the congregation as the one body of Christ before Christ its head. So there should be unity. It shouldn't be kind of these broken little pieces, but showing the unity all aligned them before Christ the head. So there's both a unity and yet also a hierarchy of the body of Christ, and then Christ as its head, the nave, and then the sanctuary at its head. The church building should bring people out of themselves and into the liturgy. So the church building should show a vision of heaven. Instead of having plain beige painted walls, there should be art, there should be iconography that reminds us that we are participating in something that transcends, that goes far beyond ourselves and connects to the otherworldly. And that music, acoustics, and sightlines are also very important for a church and important considerations to have and to be able to help the body of Christ, help us participate in a deeper and more profound way. Those are important considerations as one designs or renovates a church. And directionality and procession are also important within a church. That traditionally, there's a great tradition of churches facing east. Not every church does today, but Holy Family actually does face the east. And this is because east is the direction from which the sun, sun, rises. And so it also is that sun, son, Christ the sun rises, because Christ is our light rising from the east. And is also the direction of Christ's second coming, coming up over the Mount of Olives from the east of Jerusalem, as understood from the Bible. And members of the church, again, to the whole body of Christ, members of the church around the world are united in the liturgy, facing the same direction. And lastly, on this, is that we're not all turned in looking at each other like we're having a debate or a conference or a meeting or even a theater performance, but that we're all moving and looking together towards Christ. Again, that hierarchy, that direction, that procession. And then with all these points, what helps us is art and iconography. And so we say, what is an icon? So it's not just a Byzantine or an Orthodox Eastern style image. An icon is simply an image that points to the reality and shares in the truth that's higher than itself. Whereas St. John Paul II says is that it points beyond the subject which it represents. So it's not simply just a picture of a person, but it shares in the reality of Christ. It shares in the reality of the Blessed Virgin. And that goes throughout all of art and through all of the different figures within the church building. That they're not simply, a representation of something, but they are sharing in that reality. And again, so that can be in all different styles, from Byzantine style paintings to Gothic stained glass to Baroque statues, or even different items like a crucifix or the altar and the ambo in itself. But these are all icons within the church. And in fact, the whole church building is an icon of the church. That is not simply reminding us of the bride of Christ or reminding us of the heavenly reality, but is a partaker and shares in the reality of that heavenly reality. It shares in the reality of the bride of Christ. And that's what makes the church building so incredibly powerful. Now, we're just going to take a look at just a couple projects and talk about how some of these items have been used in them that Harrison has done. So this is a church renovation working on in South Dakota, and it has kind of fan-shaped pews. It has no center aisle. The sanctuary, it has these beige walls and even has glass in the back for the cry room. So when you're in the cry room, you're actually looking at Father's back during the Mass, which is just not an appropriate liturgical position. So what we're doing is we're creating a main aisle. We're creating this procession, this directionality. And then the sanctuary just becomes so much more fully alive with this wonderful woodwork, with marble furnishings, with paintings, with statuary that all say Christ is present here, that we are partaking in a transcendent liturgy, that these are all material things in wood and stone, but that all draws upwards, that all draws towards the immaterial, towards the transcendent, and towards God. This is a project we were looking at earlier with this gym space. We're going from something that's very plain and very secular to something that is all of a sudden so much more sacred and so much more beautiful. And now this is a place of prayer, of contemplation, for these priests to be able to live and have their prayer life together as a community and partaking in this mass that unites their community with communities and all of the us faithful all around the world. And lastly, and we'll look at that chapel in Massachusetts, where we took this Protestant space, which had an organ in the back instead of an image of Christ, instead of the tabernacle there. There's no central aisle, so there's no access, where we changed that arrangement. So that now there is, in fact, a central aisle. So there is, again, this movement that is now full of decorative painting and iconography and statues that shows all of the saints, that shows our Blessed Mother, all joining with us in this liturgy. And so in the end, it's not about creating a place that's looks nice or even it is simply beautiful, but it's a place that is profoundly beautiful, that's purposely beautiful, a place that has beauty that reveals us to the truth of what's happening, to reveal us to the liturgy that we are partaking in every time that we go to Mass. And it's beauty that drives us towards a true encounter with the divine God. That there's no expense that we can spare, no rock we cannot overturn when we are searching, when we are questing for something that is so beautiful, so powerful, and so meaningful. And so, I hope and I pray that this opportunity to renovate Holy Family will be a chance for reflection about how we can make our space more beautiful, about how we can encounter God in a more profound way, and how we can use art and architecture to be a catalyst for that. No, thank you so much for listening. I greatly appreciate your time, and I really look forward to continuing to collaborate with the parish on this project to create a place of beauty, of sanctity, and of profound encounter. Thank you so much.